throw money in there. She's got some, but.
I'd like to call this special school board meeting of July 26th to order. The time now is 5:05 p.m. The purpose of today's meeting is to hold a public hearing to consider the adoption of the 2016-2017 tentative millage rates and the 2016-2017 tentative budget. At this time, we request that all cellular phones be turned off or put into silent mode. And I would like to take this opportunity to remind the members of the public of the district's mission to ensure that each student achieves his or her highest potential and the district's vision to be a world-class school system. Today's agenda includes the presentation on the percent of increase or decrease over the rollback rate, the proposed millage, the budget overview, the proposed tentative budget, a public hearing on the tentative budget, and then the adoption of the required local effort millage, the basic discretionary millage, the capital outlay millage, the resolution determining revenues and millages, and resolution adopting the tentative millage budget or millage rates for the fiscal year of 2016-2017, the fiscal year 17 tentative budget and related resolution adopting the tentative budget, acceptance of the 2016 certification of taxable value, and the scheduling of the final budget public hearing. We'll then hear comments from the board attorney, and the superintendent. Board members, is there a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Fisher, seconded by Ms. Dozier. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. At this point, I will now turn the meeting over to Dr. Greg Atkins, the superintendent, and Dr. Amy Desmore, the assistant superintendent of business and finance.
Yeah, just a couple of quick remarks. This does involve, as you know, a very complex and lengthy process where we really dove in deep into our budget, and we tried to align our budgetary priorities with our strategic plan. It involved a significant restructuring effort here at the district office, and that effort involved attempting, and I think successfully attempting, to move more resources from the district office to schools to provide really better support for those schools moving forward into the next school year. We also, in this budget, I think we have started down the pathway of trying to do some innovative strategies to try to help enhance our capital budget, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Desmore and her team to take us through the presentation.
Great. Good afternoon, Dr. Atkins, members of the board. This hearing is the first of two public hearings required under Florida statute to give the public an opportunity to provide input into the proposed millage levy and the budget for this fiscal year. The superintendent submitted his proposed tentative budget to the board on July 20th when you received a package of material which included information on the tentative budget. I do want to say that we provided a new organizational chart today. I apologize that we included actually the FY16 org chart and not grabbed the correct FY17 updated org chart, so you all received that new one today with the PowerPoint, so our apologies for that error. This hearing was advertised in the news press on July 22nd. The second and final budget public hearing by your approval will be held on Tuesday, September 13th at 5:05 p.m. at this location. And a notice of that meeting will be provided to the public through a direct mailing from the property appraiser's office. That mail document is known as the TRIM, or the Truth and Millage Notice, and that's sent as required by law. So as we get into the material and the PowerPoint that you have, as outlined in TRIM requirements, we must discuss the millage rollback rate. That rollback rate is the millage with which, when applied to the current year's tax roll, net of any adjustments for new growth, would produce the same dollars as received in the previous year. As presented in this information, the calculated rollback rate is 6.7628 mils. We're actually proposing to levy 6.989 mils, which is an increase in the rollback rate of 3.34%. I do want to point out that the required local effort rollback rate represents a 1.39% increase, and required local effort actually is 68% of the total millage that we're proposing to levy this afternoon. The proposed millage rate for the 2016-17 school year, as we stated, is 6.989 mils, which is actually a decrease of 0.296 mils from what we levied the previous year of 7.285 mils. That new millage rate will generate about $25 million more than we received in the previous year because of the increase in the tax roll and the changes in the FEFP. So just to show, this slide shows a comparison of what the millage rates have done over the past 10 years. As you can see from the slide, the millage rate has decreased over the past several years. This is basically a function of the tax roll increasing, and through the FEFP calculation, generally as the tax roll increases, the tax rate itself will decrease. As you look at the tax roll history here, you'll see over that same period of time that you saw the millage decreasing, that tax roll is increasing. This year we're up to a tax roll of $75.8 billion, and that represents about a 9.7% increase in the tax roll from last year. So when we look at what the effect will be on taxpayers, we have several different scenarios here. We have scenarios where property values are increasing by 9.7%, and we use that number because, as I stated, the tax roll is increasing at 9.7%. So depending on your property, of course, if you're not homesteaded, that value could have increased any percentage, but on average, it's a 9.7% increase. Then we have other scenarios where the increase of that market value is, or of that appraised value, is 3%. And we do that because through Save Our Homes, then if you are homesteaded, that value can increase by a maximum of 3%. So when we look at the two different scenarios, in the 9.7% increase scenarios, we are assuming that these particular values are not homesteaded. So in the case where you have a home that was valued at $200,000 last year, if that increases by 9.7%, your new taxable value this year would be $219,400. Based on last year's tax rate of 7.285 mils, you would have been looking at a tax bill for the school district of $1,457. The new rate this year would give you a tax bill of $1,533 for the school district. So that's an increase of about $76. For those individuals who are seeing a cap on that increase in value of 3%, you see the scenarios. So generally, those people will have a tax decrease because of the fact that the value of the home is not increasing as much as the tax rate decreased. So the impact on the taxpayer is very much dependent on what the situation is of the value of the home. So as we stated, the total proposed millage levy is 6.98 mils, broken down into several different pieces. First of all, required local effort, and that millage is required by law to be levied and approved by school districts in order to participate or receive any other state funding through the FEFP. That millage is 4.741, and the proposed amount to be raised from that millage is $345.1 million. And as I stated before, that required local effort is about 68% of the total millages that we're asking for today. Basic discretionary millage stays the same at 0.748, and that proposed amount to be raised is $54.4 million. The capital outlay millage is at the max of 1.5. The proposed amount to be raised through that millage, $109.2 million, for a total millage of 6.989 and a total amount to be raised from those three millages of $508.7 million. The total proposed budget for 2016-17 for all funds is $1.4 billion, as broken down into the 6 different funds as you see illustrated here. The tentative budget book that you have explains each of our required funds, and we're going to discuss each of those funds in just a little bit of detail right now. So first, just to kind of talk in general for the public's sake about the different funds within our budget, we have 6 different. The general fund is just as a sound. It's the general operating expenses of the school district, and that's where we handle most of those expenses within that fund. Debt service is for the payment of the school district's debt. Capital is used for capital expenditures to build schools, buy equipment, and provide maintenance and technology for our schools. The food service fund is self-supporting, and it supports the breakfast and lunch program across the district. Our special revenue funds consist of all of our federal funds that we receive through grants that must be used for the specific purpose in which the grants were written. And the internal service funds accounts for all of our insurance costs across the district, both health insurance and property and liability. So let's look at each in general. Of course, our operating fund is the bread and butter of the district. It's our major source of revenue for the district's daily operations. This year, it's budgeted at the tentative budget, of course, at $855 million, and that represents about 61% of the total $1.4 billion we're talking about today. And we are set to support over 92,000 students for next year. It's an increase of about 1,950 students, or 50 FTE from where we were last year. So we continue to grow by leaps and bounds. The FEFP, or the Florida Education Finance Program, is the major source of funding within our general fund. $676 million in total FEFP revenue that we're set to receive right now. Of course, that is based on the number of FTE that we are set to receive. That number will be recalculated throughout the year based on the FTE that actually does arrive. That's a $21.1 million increase from the previous year, mostly due to the new students that we're expecting, as I mentioned. It does constitute about a 1% increase in per pupil funding. We have discussed that within our budget talks leading up to the hearing this year. It was a disappointing increase, but it's what we received, and so we felt like we built the best budget we could with that. There's a $6.26 increase in the BSA, or the base student allocation, and 41% of the funds that we're receiving in FEFP are actually coming from the state level, meaning 59% of that $676 million total is coming from the property taxes that you all are being asked to approve today. So when we look at the sources of operating revenues, we have about 59% coming from local sources, and I'm sorry that for whatever reason those numbers aren't showing up here, but 59% from local sources, 41% from state sources, and then a very, very small sliver, less than 1%, coming from federal sources in the operating fund. Now remember, most of the federal funds are in the special revenue fund. Very small amount of federal in the operating fund, basically from our Medicaid reimbursements and JROTC. Okay, now where that money goes, and each of those, we have the categories breakdowns for you in terms of the expenditures within the operating funds and how those are divvied out. We have about 69% at this point that are budgeted for instruction or direct school expenses, and that includes school administration. So typically that number will hover somewhere between 70 and 73%, so we expect that to go up as we get to the final budget time, but at tentative budget, this is where we stand. We have another 12% that's in operations and maintenance, and then 8% that's in our student transportation. So just an illustration so that we can show where those operating expenses are budgeted. The bulk, of course, as it should be, inside of the instruction or direct school expenses. Going to some of our other funds, just to give an overview of what those are. Within food service, that current budget is $63.7 million. That budget does continue to include breakfast for every child at no additional cost to parents, so children are not having to bring money when they get lunch at schools. Lunch prices for those schools who are not under the Community Eligibility Program do remain the same for 2017, and that Community Eligibility Program that we started last year remains in effect, and as we mentioned earlier in the year, we are adding one more school to that fold, Ida Baker High, for the upcoming year. So we have a preponderance of our schools at this point that are in the Community Eligibility Program. The Special Revenue Fund is currently budgeted at $77.5 million. Now, this is where all of those funds are from our federal, from federal sources. Title I and IDEA and TIF are our major sources of grant funding, and then there are some other federal grants as well that are written there at $77.5 million. Our capital funds are in the tentative budget at $209.6 million. Our local property tax, and remember that millage, that 1.5%, 1.5 capital millage is set to raise a little over $109 million. That is currently our sole source of substantial revenue within the capital fund. There is a plan, and you all have the 5-year capital plan within the tentative budget book that you received, and there is a plan to take on debt for the new South Zone and East Zone high schools within that capital plan, and you'll see those numbers show up within that plan. Our major focus within capital is, besides those new buildings, are maintenance and renovations of existing buildings and being able to provide for technology to support the instructional programs within our schools. And then another major area of focus this year within the capital plan is the replacement of our aging bus fleet. And so that is another area where we worked with our Assistant Superintendent of Operations. He presented the plan to us in order to provide some additional funding there that will save some operational dollars in terms of repairs and be able to bring our bus fleet closer to compliance with staying on a better rotation schedule. Debt service. Now, debt service, the dollars within that, $41.5 million, come strictly from a transfer from our capital funds to the debt service fund in order to pay essentially the mortgage of the district each year. We will add additional payments with the addition of debt for LLL this year, but right now it's budgeted at $41.5 million. And based on the statutory debt service capacity, we're at a little over 50% of our limitation, or that is, statute says you can spend up to 75% of what you take in on your capital millage. So we can spend up to 75% of that $109 million that we're taking in for our millage levy on debt. We're only at about half of that, okay? But you all as a board have told us, well, we really want you to stay closer to 50% of that levy as opposed to 75%. So as far as the recommended debt service capacity, which is 50% of that limitation, we're at about 76% of that. Our reserves in the budget, reserves of course are there to protect the district's financial position, and right now between contingency and board priorities that represents 5.5% of our new revenue, which is within the realm that you all have stated before that you wanted to stay in. The superintendent mentioned a growth increment earlier this evening, and so we wanted to talk a little bit about that. So within the superintendent's proposed tentative budget, it contains the intent to implement what we're calling here the growth increment funding. So for school districts, changes in the tax roll do not equate to large changes in operating funding, since operating funding is driven by FEFP. So remember, as I mentioned earlier, generally as the tax roll goes up, the millage goes down. So really that tax roll isn't the driver of new funding that we receive in the operating fund. Instead, really the driver of that additional funding is additional students. So the growth increment calculation takes that additional FTE the district will get this year and multiplies that by the percentage of per student funding from the previous year, by a percentage of the per student funding from the previous year. We do that because a certain level of service must be maintained for new students, so the calculation takes the percentage of the general fund that is for non-personnel related expenses and sets aside that funding, which would be equal to the new FTE, times the per student funding times that applicable percentage, and that's usually between 30 and 32%. So if I can take you through this slide, what that means for this year would be that in 2016, we had FTE of a little over 90,000. In 2017, we're expecting a little over 92,000. That difference is 1,950 FTE. Our per student funding was $7,271, and we have about a non-personnel percentage in our operating funds right now of about 30%. So if you take that 1950 times the 7,271 times 30%, that gives us an amount of $4.3 million approximately. That would basically be set aside in order to be utilized for additional capital expenditures. Now that amount would be recalculated based on the actual FTE increase we receive and the budget non-personnel percentage. So 1,950 FTE increase is what we're expecting. If it turns out to be something more or less than that, then that calculation would change based on what the actual increase actually was. And as I said, then those dollars would be set aside and used for capital expenditures such as HVAC, roofing, plumbing, and student safety. And the projects that it would be earmarked for ideally would realize some kind of operational efficiency so that we'll be receiving some of the benefit of that back in the operating fund. So to kind of discuss the risk to that, this adjustment this year leaves us some, very little flexibility in terms of what may be happening during the year. Now, remember, we do have reserves set aside, as we had mentioned before. The tentative budget book does also outline some additional reserves in other places, such as like an FTE shortfall reserve. We have that set aside. So those are the things that we can utilize to have some flexibility. Beyond that, very little left there. Any unexpected budget changes at the state level could require adjustment to our board reserve. So each year we expect to have some proration from the state. We've seen it every year, and we always discuss those with you. In the past several years, it's been anywhere between 1.2 to a little over $2 million. So we have no reason to not expect that this year. So we do have a reserve set aside for that. However, if it ends up being something additional or something more than what we expected, then we'll have to have a conversation about that. And then prolonged use of this could take a toll will take a toll on the resources that we have in the general fund because it is a sizable amount each year. The benefits of this being that, of course, the additional revenue would be used for capital initiatives that are prioritized, that the superintendent and the board finds important, and that hopefully these initiatives will be aimed at increasing some operational efficiency. So, to wrap, our school district budget supports 122 schools. That's with the addition of a new charter school for this year, supporting over 92,000 students, so as big as we've ever been. I don't know that I expected to really say that number. 92,000 sounds like a whole heck of a lot. We're supporting the initiatives of the state, the district's vision and mission, of course, and it is centered on student achievement and the strategic plan, as the superintendent mentioned earlier. And so, of course, we respectfully submit this budget to you all in support of that mission, the students and employees of our school district, and on behalf of the citizens of Lee County. And so the ask that we have tonight is to have the board adopt all of the proposed millages for the 2016-2017 tentative budget, to adopt the tentative budget for that same year, and adopt all resolutions related to the millages and the budget. Yep. Yes, thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the public hearing. We will now recess the special school board meeting, open the public hearing to consider the adoption of the tentative proposed millage rates and the tentative budget for the 2016-2017 year. Dr. Atkins, please continue by stating your recommendations for the public.
Okay, the first recommendation is recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 tentative proposed required local effort millage of 4.7410 mils, with a proposed amount to be raised $345,104,000. The required local effort includes the basic RLE of 4.7290 and a prior period adjustment of .012 millage. Recommendation 2, recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 tentative proposed basic discretionary millage of .748 mils, with a proposed amount to be raised of $54,447,963. Recommendation 3, recommend the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 tentative proposed capital outlay millage of 1.50, with a proposed amount to be raised of $109,187,092. The total millage will equal 6.989 mils, with a total amount to be raised of $508,739,055. The total millage rate will be levied exceeds the rollback rate by 3.34%. Recommendation 4, recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the resolution determining revenues and millages levied and the resolution adopting the tentative millage rates for the fiscal year 2016-2017. Recommendation 5, recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the tentative budget and related resolution adopting the tentative budget for the 2016-17 school year as follows. General operating in the amount of $855,113,220. Special revenue budget in the amount of $141,241,487. Debt service budget in the amount of $51,078,350. Capital outlay budget in the amount of $209,648,473. Internal service budget in the amount of $149,748,738 for a total tentative budget of $1,406,860,268.
$830,000.
Oh, I'm sorry, $1,406,830,268. Recommendation 6, recommend that the Lee County School Board accept the 2016 Certificate of Taxable Value for Lee County, Form DR420S, and authorize the superintendent to complete and execute the form. Recommendation 7, recommend that the Lee County School Board schedule a public hearing on the final 2016-2017 millage levies and final budget for the 2016-2017 school year for Tuesday, September 13th, 2016, at a special scheduled board meeting to begin at 5:05 p.m. in the Lee County Public Education Center boardroom.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins. At this time, the public will be invited to speak on these matters. The time allowed for each speaker will be 3 minutes. Is there anyone on the right side of this, of the seats that would like to speak? Is there anybody on the left side that would like to speak? One. Okay, Mr. Castellano.
Toiber, thank you, Dr. Atkins and board members. I'm Mark Castellano. I am president of the Teachers Association of Lee County. I know all too well the shortfalls in this budget and what the state has failed to provide. This is nothing new to us. We've all been through this for too many years now. But all of that said, the number one comment that we are receiving as we head into negotiations is salary. It is, I hate to, wasn't particularly my favorite movie, but show me the money. And that is really something we're going to have to focus on. So the challenge is yours to be creative, and I know Dr. Atkins has got an amazing team to work with, but we strongly encourage you because if you've not been hearing it, I don't know how, because we have been. So that's what I ask you to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I will now close the public hearing and reconvene the special school board meeting of July 26th, 2016. The board now will consider each of the superintendent's recommendations. Dr. Atkins, please restate the recommendations individually, allowing the board the opportunity to vote before moving on to the next one.
Yes, sir. The first recommendation is to recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt a 2016-2017 tentative proposed required local effort millage of 4.741 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $345,104,000. The required local effort includes the basic RLE of 4.729 and a prior period adjustment millage of 0.012.
Thank you. Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Ms. Morgan, seconded by Ms. La Riviera. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Dr. Atkins.
A second recommendation is recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 tentative proposed basic discretionary millage of 0.748 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $54,447,963.
Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Fisher,
Second.
seconded by Ms. La Riviera. Any discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
Third recommendation is recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 tentative proposed capital outlay millage of 1.50 with a proposed amount to be raised of $109,187,092. The total millage will equal 6.989 mils with a total amount to be raised of $508,739,055. The total millage rate to be levied exceeds the rollback rate by 3.34%.
Board members, you heard the recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Support.
Moved by Ms. Dozier, second by Ms. Moved by Ms. Dozier, second by Ms. Morgan. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Dr. Atkins.
Next recommendation is recommend the Lee County School Board adopt a resolution determining revenues and millages levied and the resolution adopting the tentative millage rates for fiscal year 2016-2017.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins. Board members, you heard the recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Fisher, seconded by Ms. Dozier. Any discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Dr. Atkins.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the tentative budget and related resolution adopting the tentative budget for the 2016-17 school year as follows. General operating in the amount of $855,113,220. Special revenue budget in the amount of $141,241,487. Debt service budget in the amount of $51,078,350. Capital outlay budget in the amount of $209,648,473. Internal service budget in the amount of $149,748,738 for a total tentative budget of $1,406,830,268.
Board members, you heard the recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Support.
Moved by Ms. Dozier, seconded by Ms. Morgan. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Dr. Atkins.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board accept the 2016 Certificate of Taxable Value for Lee County, Form DR420S, and authorize the superintendent to complete and execute the form.
Board members, you heard the recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Morgan, seconded by Ms. Fisher. Any discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Your last recommendation.
I recommend that the Lee County School Board schedule a public hearing on the final 2016-2017 millage levies and final budget for the 2016-2017 school year for Tuesday, September 13th, 2016, at a specially scheduled board meeting to begin at 5:05 p.m. in the Lee County Public Education Center boardroom.
Board members, you heard the final recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
By Ms. Fisher, seconded by Ms. Morgan. Any discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Dr. Atkins. Next on the agenda, we have comments from the board members, the board attorney, and the superintendent. I'll start with you, Ms. LaRiviere.
Question, and this is me looking through the budget, this is what I was trying to figure out. Is there a page number I can go to find out what our current balance is on our debt service?
Actually, no, not in the tentative budget book.
Okay.
We have that in the final budget book, but, hold on, I can tell you because I just wrote this down. So that number is about 520 million, with principal and interest, and 408 million just in principal only. Okay, now that's before the recent sale, and we will typically have a debt service schedule that shows like the principal and interest in the final budget document, but I don't think we put it in this tentative.
Okay,
We
so-
have, a debt schedule, that just shows what the debt payment is for the current
Right.
year, but not the whole principal and interest.
So out of curiosity then, what would be the projected balance after we pay our debts, our 41.5 million?
So I'm sorry, let me come back to you on that. If
Okay.
you look on page 52, that does have the outstanding debt,
Thank you.
okay? But tell me again what your last question was, I apologize.
Fine, you're doing a great job.
Okay.
Better job than I ever would be able to do. Do we have a projected balance then after we pay the 41.5 million this year?
Yes, okay, so if you look on page 52, it shows you over the next, through 2028, what those balances will be as they go down in each fiscal year. So in 17, you'll see that number coming down to about 389 million.
Thank you. I was
Okay.
looking through to see, and I just never made it to page 52.
No, that's okay, I was thinking that actually page 52 wasn't in there, but it is, so there it is, okay.
And then I have another question, as you looked at it. When I looked at for the number of lowest performing schools this year, we don't have as many as we did last year, correct? So
Correct.
what, did we get what was the projected savings? Do we know how much we saved by not having as many schools, or?
Yeah,
It was about a couple hundred. So on average, that expenditure was a couple 100,000 per school.
Okay.
We went to only 3 this year, and I believe, if I remember correctly, we would have had 9 the year in FY16, so about 1.2 million.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Ms. Morgan.
No, I have none. Oh,
Ms.
no, go ahead.
Ms. Dozier?
I do have something. Back on this page 116 that talks about the growth increment, I want to make sure that we are not doing anything that is
She said 116.
hiding anything that we are not supposed to do, that in fact this is permissible by law, that boards do this.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know off the top of my head of other boards that have done it, so I can't say whether other boards have done it or have not done it.
That was
but-
not the question.
Okay.
I said, are we in fact doing anything that we are not allowed to do? Are we doing anything that is prohibited by law? And are we doing anything that is being deceitful to the public?
No, it is not prohibited by law. No, no.
Okay, all right, so we are allowed, what you're saying is we are allowed to do this, take this money from the FTE?
This is actually from the general fund.
Well, it is a set aside in the general fund that would be used for specific capital expenditures that are outlined. So yes, that can be done.
Okay, can you give an explanation as to where the money we are actually recouping this money from?
It's coming from, where the money is coming from, it's coming from the operating fund, yes.
It's new
And it
money.
would be,
It's new money.
Well, I understand that, but I want her to say that.
Oh, okay.
I want you to tell us exactly where we are recouping this money from. I'm not sure that this slide shows that. I mean, while we are going to recoup $4,253,535, there is a way that we are getting this money. Can you tell the public how we are going to get this money?
well, yeah, we're receiving the money as part of the allocation through the FEFP, which ultimately would be driven by the property tax millage levy that we're levying for this year.
Okay, so we are actually taking money from the property taxes, that is new money for this year, and we are putting that money into capital so that we can have those expenditures. And it's my understanding that this is going to be something that we are going to do until we have another source of income?
That really would be to the, up to the superintendent and the board. We'll do it each year that is the, that's the desire and the direction to do, yes.
All right. And I think something that would be helpful to us, because I know that we have the figures from the county, if we could have a projection over the course of 5 years approximately with the anticipated growth, and I know I have received that from the county, if you could give us like a scale by the time we come back in September of what that projection would be over the course of 5 years.
Yes.
Thank you.
So just to, try to put this a little bit in layman's terms, we looked at, and Dr. Desimars, I'd asked her to look at some different algorithms to calculate ways based on growth to dedicate some funds, a funding source to capital. Because if you look at our budget over time, you're going to notice that operational dollars in the general fund do continue to increase. Our capital budget was significantly impacted. And so back when we were capital rich and operations poor, as you recall, we went from transferring 10 million from the capital budget to the operating budget to 20 million. Okay? This last budget, we no longer, because again we're capital poor and now the operating budget continues to go up, not as much as we would like, but it still continues to go up. We still felt we needed to do a little bit more. So now we have taken the growth in the district, which we compared the county's system to our system. There's a little bit of a difference because we're driven by FTE. Our millage is adjusted by the state. They have a little bit more control over it. So we looked at a couple, really 3 different models that we could calculate this. 2 of them came up to about this number. This one we felt was more pure in how it calculated this amount based on actual student growth and factoring out the portion of that that is non-personnel related. So it would be things that you would spend on other things besides personnel, and then putting that into the calculation. Actually, both of the figures, this calculation methodology and the other one that we looked at, which was basing it on our discretionary millage, which our discretionary millage, we have control, right? So that stays the same. It doesn't adjust up and down based on what we're told for required local effort. So we tried both methodologies, and they both came up with really about the same type of figure. So, so we can pull that for you, but for this particular run, $4.2 million. And one of the things I think that came out in her presentation was what we want to do with these dollars is these are things that actually come to me as a superintendent that I would discuss with you as the board in terms of projects like HVAC, roofing, other ways to get operational efficiencies that we then could increase, dollars that we have available to us based on savings that we get from efficiencies that we realize. And I think honestly we have a lot of opportunity in this area if you look at some like energy just alone. So
Thank you.
Ms. Fisher?
I think I had my question answered.
Okay,
Thank you.
I just have, one of the issues that I have with our budget is that 70% of our budget is operational or or teacher support. Yet we really don't, for example, our transportation personnel, are they in the transportation budget or are they in that piece of the pie for the
Operations.
educational, the teacher
Operations.
operational dollars.
Transportation would be in the piece of the pie for transportation.
Okay, and same thing with maintenance.
Maintenance would have been in that, I'm going to flip back to the slide if I can.
Under support.
Yeah, it would be under operations and maintenance. There's a category just for that. So it's not under the support services. Support services would be more like in this building. Operations and maintenance are in their own special category.
And here's my issue with the 70% that's in the instructional or the operational portion to actually teaching for increasing education, which is actually directly related to students. We need to do better as far as where everything is categorized. For example, if you're touching a student, if you're a teacher or a para, and you're doing the educational base, that's one category. If you're a principal or an assistant principal, you're in a different category. If you're a support staff where you're either a nurse or the librarian or a counselor, that's a different category. And the reason why is they're all not linear. When we add children, you have a certain base mark. Once you hit your hard line as far as your operational costs, as far as your absorption, as far as how many librarians can service how many people, well, they can do, let's say, 400 students, whatever it may be. That number doesn't change up until you hit 400. Then it changes at that point dramatically for need another librarian until you hit that 800. So you find out where your cross zones are. We've maximized the reason why we have our high schools as big as we are because we took advantage of that XY cross. Right. Yet we don't in the budget, we don't look at that. Mm-hmm. And so I want to take a look at that whole how we look at that FBFP as far as when we start talking about the incremental money that we can actually take a look at. How many dollars do we really need per student FEFP, and how much of it can we actually take that to support our infrastructure, our capital? Okay. And the second thing I want to talk about is I had a discussion, I think Ms. Morgan did as well, is we really have to take a really strong look at our virtual schools. That our virtual schools, not so much as how much money we can still make, but how much money we're losing when we don't supply the education here, and it actually goes to the Florida virtual school versus the Lee virtual school. Those dollars don't come into our school, into our system. They get withheld up at the state level. But they also, when they withhold that state level for the FEFP, that includes also the class size because that's tied to the same student. So there's a formula, and I had discussions with Mr. Schilling, and he's much more adept at it than I am, but I would ask that we take a look at what we can do to be a much more aggressive at some of the, like Pasco and Broward, that are actually taking full advantage for millions of dollars that we're actually giving to the state because of the way they set up their virtual school and how they lock in the 1.0 as far as the FEFP. As soon as, for example, someone signs up for a class, those dollars, we don't get any more credit if the student's in a full classroom and they take 2 extra classes. We don't get paid for those dollars. So we really need to take a look at that, because I think the state, in their infinite wisdom and how they crafted that flow through those dollars, I think we're getting less money than we could possibly get, and that may be another revenue source.
We will absolutely do that. In fact, I know Mr. Mora he is looking at our student assignment plan 5 years out, and I have him working on something else for me, which is why he's not out there in the audience. But he is looking at the impact of virtual school on our capacity moving forward. But I think that's a very good point that you raise. The executive roundtable, there was also at least one member there that raised the same issues. How can you be certain that this is the capacity that you need because I see school changing over the next 5 to 10 years, and you have to account for that in your capital plan. So, good thing about having people like that in the room is they challenge your thinking and make you think outside the box sometimes.
Absolutely, and also too, using the virtual school in conjunction with our planning periods to allow, allow them, all the kids to do whatever class they happen to be doing, to allow that teacher to actually do planning period to be able to utilize some of the capacity that we currently have, that teacher doesn't have to be there, but the students still can utilize that room, for the virtual school.
Something else, one other thing that we're exploring a little bit more of, we did a model actually this year, but we may need to expand it as we continue to struggle with our teacher shortage. But some of these areas, like let's say a physics teacher, we actually can virtual or remote in to another school that's holding a class. So you can have, and this may be something we can utilize where they don't offer a class at school A, but I'm in school A in terms of attendance, but I would like to attend a class at school B that meets at the same time. So we're also looking at expanding that as well.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all I have. Mr. Martin.
Nothing this time.
Dr. Atkins.
I don't have nothing else at this time.
Okay, thank you. At this point, having no other business come before this body, I'll take a motion to it for adjournment.
So moved. Support.
Moved by Ms. Dozier, seconded by Ms. Morgan. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene.